Drums and percussion, it's like the lifeblood of house and techno. So today I'm going to show you how to take your loops from this to this. Let's go. Hey guys, Dilby here. Welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to be talking about drums and percussion. I get so many messages about this, like how do you make your drums more interesting? How do you get your drums to sound full? Basically, how do you get cool drums in your tracks? Well, today I'm going to show you some of the techniques that I use to take my drums from like a simple punchy groove to something a bit more nuanced, textured and interesting. And very importantly, how to take it from a short loop to an extended drum section that's not going to get boring to the listener. If you like the track that you can hear, well, it's a new one of mine on King Street's sub-label Night Grooves. There's a link in the description if you want to go check it out. Also, trying to get to 10K on the channel by the end of the year. We're literally so close, but a bunch of people still aren't subscribed. Not cool. Stop what you're doing, go down, hit the button, subscribe. Let's do it. 10K by the end of the year. Now let's make some drums. Alright guys, so here we are inside Ableton, and this is a little beat that I've put together to demonstrate how we can take a pretty basic loop and make it a bit more pro sounding. So let's take a listen. I think it's a cool basic loop. The sounds work well together. It's based on the classic 909 drum machine, so you know it just works great for house and techno. It's got some cool sounds in there, some interaction, but it's pretty basic. So let's have a listen. We've got our drums. I've also added a bass line, which is just a loop from Underground Shades of House, my sample pack. Link up here if you want to grab that. And then there's also like a pad, also coming from Underground Shades of House. Good usable samples. Okay, so let's have a look at what's in here. We've just got a kick, basic 909. Got a clap, 909. Absolute classic. We've got a snare. There's just one from my sample pack. We've got a 909 rim. Hats, classic, 909 open. I've got this single open 808 as well. Just adds a little bit of accentuation on the last one of the bar. Got the 16th shaker. Just with a little bit of LFO tool, creating a little bit of groove. And then we've got this single percussion hit, which is a bit more of an organic sound. So, as I said, I think it's a nice groove. We've also got a crash, which is just happening every 4 bars. Without the crash, actually, it's just a 1 bar loop. So the crash adds a little bit of length, but otherwise it really is just super short 1 bar. So what we're going to do is have a look at some techniques that I use to take a simple 1 bar loop like that, which I believe sounds good. I think it's a good starting point. Try and make it a bit more interesting, give it a bit more length and help it to sound much less loopy. So let's jump in and we'll have a look at the kick here. So what I've done is duplicated the kick MIDI over 4 bars like this and then just added a little double kick at the end. Just adds a little turnaround every 4 bars, just going to make things sound interesting. Then I've duplicated it again and just taken out those last kicks, which gives us a little pause. Good stuff. All right. Then I thought, okay, the 909, it's a nice, punchy, very functional kick for the club. It's got a big sub on it, but it doesn't really cut through for smaller speakers. So I've just added this top kick. Same pattern. It's a bit more of an organic sounding kick with a slightly louder, brighter transient. I've just taken away any sub. We don't need it. It's just to help the kick cut through. So that's going to work very well for our sound on smaller speakers like mobile phones or laptops. Now, we've got the clap. What I've done with this loop is just duplicated it a couple of times. I've added in this extra little clap fill. And then I just made another clap fill on the 8th bar. So that works well together with the kick pause to kind of add a little bit of tension and release. I've also done a similar thing with the snare and the rim. So the snare, I was just playing here before the 3rd kick in the bar. I've duplicated the loop and just added a second snare. So that just extends the loop over 2 bars instead of 1. Nice one. Now the rim, I did a little bit differently. What we actually had going on in the rim was this repetitive pattern every bar. So I've actually taken out the second bar and the fourth bar, and I've put some differentiation between the first and the third bar. So this is extending out that loop to 4 bars. And instead of using addition, we're using subtraction to create difference in the loop. Because if we're always adding things, then our loop's just going to get busier and busier. So sometimes we can take things away to add more interest. We're really starting to get somewhere. Okay, so the hats. What I've done here, we did have a very simple hat pattern like this, just like the same thing happening every offbeat. I mean, I think the 909 hi-hat just sounds good always, but what I've done here is just extended the first note, just made it slightly longer, so now it kind of accentuates the first beat of the bar. You can feel that that first hat is slightly accentuated than the other ones. Now to create a bit more interest, I've just added this extra 16th note on the second beat of the bar. Sorry, the second beat of the second bar. That's starting to work with some of the other elements to create some more swing and groove in there as well. It also creates a bit more intensity and a bit more interest in the pattern. Very cool stuff. Let's have a look at how we can use layering on some of these elements to create a bit more interest. Let's go back to the clap. Now I've got this late layer. We can see here that it's got a long attack on the transient. There's not a sharp transient at the start. It sounds like this. So it's a much more organic, kind of natural, real human hand clap sound. It's got this long extended attack portion, which is going to provide contrast against the 909, which has a very sharp transient at the start. So if I play the 909 and then add in the late clap, so we can hear that this one's kind of sucking in after this 909 happens. Then when there's these fills, it's adding extra contrast. Now I've also got this body layer to the clap. So this is somewhere between a clap and a snare, I would say. It's quite dull, but it's quite deep sounding. So I wouldn't really pick this as a snare to use in my track because it's not really going to stand out. It's going to make the track a bit muddy. But as something to go under the 909, which is quite bright, it's going to work really well to add some extra body. So let's listen to that 909 clap. You can hear that really fills it out. It makes the clap sound a lot thicker. And then with the late layer as well. So now we've got this really big sounding clap, and all of these layers have different textures which complement each other to make the clap sound like a lot more complex and nuanced than it originally was. And that's what we're looking for when we're layering. Sounds that are different enough but complement each other so that there's space for each of them. Now, if we go to the open hats, we're also going to layer an open hat. So we've got a slightly different pattern, and we've got a shaker sound instead of a hat. So you can't really hear that. I'll turn it up. It's adding some nice kind of drive and groove, and it's a different texture than the 909 open hat. Sounds a lot more organic. So we could also search for a different sound in context. Let's go. I think that Argon one was actually pretty cool. Complements that 909 quite well. Now to add a bit more interest, texture and separation from the 909, what I'm going to do is turn up this random pan to about 50%. And that's just going to move each one of these shaker hits into the panorama in a random fashion. So that's going to extend our loop even longer because each time it plays, it's going to be in a different place in the panorama. that does accentuate the hat a bit as it's quite loud in the sides. So that's why I'm going to pull it down to about -15 or so. So that's really adding some texture and some width to our loop now. Now we've got our 808 open hat, just playing on the last beat. It's a cool sound. But it's very repetitive, and it's also based on a noise oscillator, just like the 909. So what we're going to do is use a different hat, which is this one. So this actually sounds like a real played hi-hat from a drum kit. You can see just by looking at the sample itself, it's got a lot more texture. It looks like white noise. This has got a lot more going on. Now what I've done again is like subtraction. I've taken away every other hit, and then at the end I've just created this little fill and extended the length a bit. So let's have a listen to that in context. So you can hear that that stands out a lot more. It's got a lot more contrast to the other hats than the 808 sound did. Now we've got our 16th shaker. It works well to add some pace to the track, but it's not very interesting. It's quite a bland sound in and of itself. So what I've done is I've taken the same shaker sound, same pattern, and I've just turned off a bunch of the notes to create this kind of motif, and then that's repeating over 3 bars, and the 4th bar is a little different. So then we're extending our loop to 4 bars. So it sounds really cool in the way that it's different. It's not as repetitive, but it's kind of lost that rolling power that we got from the 16th shaker. It's adding more energy. So what I've done here is I've made this rack, which has got a delay. It's a 16th note ping pong delay, 100% wet, a bit of feedback, a little bit of filter, and a little bit of width to bring that delay in slightly to the center. So this is reducing the width to 56%. We've also got the dry signal. So each one of these shakers is going to come through dry, and then we've also got this delay happening underneath. Let's hear how that sounds. Really cool. And now we've got a bit of width, we've got some texture, some differentiation. We're still adding that pace with all the 16th sounds. So let's listen in context. Very cool stuff. Okay, so let's have a look at the percussion. What can we do with this percussion? So we've got our basic percussion sound here, which I really like actually. It's really nice. It punctuates the start of the loop and contrasts with some of the other sounds well. It adds some energy and some intensity to the loop, but by itself it's a bit boring. So what we want to do is introduce a couple more sounds to get a bit of call and response happening. So I've got percussion 2, which sounds like this. Percussion 1. So these are going to be doing a call and response type of thing. Let's listen to them with the kick and the clap. So you can hear they're kind of signaling to each other to play. Now we've got a third one, so let's bring that in. So this is interacting with some of the other elements like the claps, and these three together are really starting to have like a call and response conversation. That's what we're looking for. We're going to look at this Atmos perk. Now this is just another similar idea to this perk 2 and perk 3, happening less frequently. Happening here, see there's space for it in this groove. We're always looking for areas where there's space to place these. And then what I've got is a big reverb and a little bit of overdrive to help bring up some of that reverb. This is what the original sound sounds like. Cool sound. Let's hear it in context. So you can hear that it's working in a call and response manner with the other percussion sounds, but because it's got that big reverb on it, it kind of sits back in the track. So this way we're adding texture and depth and interest to the track. We're filling it out in a 3D manner. Now, one thing that's quite common is adding some loopy loops on top of your track.
At the end, you add some loopy loops, and that's it.
I do it, you do it, your favorite producer does it, your mum probably does it. But how do we go about doing that right? So I've prepared a couple of things in Loop Cloud. Let's have a listen. Bit chaotic, let's have a listen in context. So for the most part, it's a bit of a mess. We can see that the timing's a bit all over the place, especially on these claps. But there's a part at the start that I really like where it's got this kind of sucking sound. It kind of sucks into the first clap. Right here. We'll just mute that again and go back to our project. So here we go. I've added it in here. And I've used the clip gain automation to isolate it. Now we'll see where it's sitting here in this loop. It's happening only once every 4 bars, and I haven't put it in the first bar. You know, I'm trying to add some more interest later on in our loop, which helps to extend out our loop, make it longer and less loopy. But let's hear it in context with just this kind of sucking sound into the clap. So you can hear it's really interacting well with this atmospheric perk. Very nice. And all of that other stuff that we didn't need, we just got rid of it. Now we've got this other loop. Let's take a listen. Now we've got a pretty good foundation for our beat, but let's have a listen. So what I like about this loop is the sound that's happening on the offbeat hats, this kind of tonal percussion sound. I think we've got space for that in our track, and it adds some nice texture and something quite interesting for our track. All right, so here we go in Ableton, and I've just got this looping. It's a 2-bar loop, and I've used the clip gain envelope again to just isolate a couple of these sounds, and it's happening over 2 bars. Each one's different, so that's extending our loop. So if I was playing all of them, it would be kind of repetitive, but this way it's interacting with other elements and creating more kind of texture and interest and groove across the track. So in my opinion, that's one of the best ways to utilize loops for your drum tracks. Is to kind of listen for things where there's space in your track. You need to be able to block out the other sounds that aren't fitting and just listen out for the ones that are complementing your track. It's a skill like any other that you need to practice, but if you can start to do that, then you can really use loops to your advantage. So I'm going to talk about one more thing, which is this clave polyrhythm. So I'll just chuck in this simple one here. Turn off this percussion. The snare and rim off as well. Because we can demonstrate this better with more space. So what's happening here? We've got this loop which is repeating over 2.5 bars plus 1 extra beat. Actually, it's repeating like this, but it's just easier to demonstrate if we've got a longer loop. So it's repeating over every 3/16. And that sounds like this. So in relation to the other elements, that's constantly changing, which allows our loop to sound much, much longer and maintain interest for a much longer period of time. Now, this is a very simple clave sound. As I said, it's really just a loop like that. So the other thing that I've prepared is a more complex clave loop. It's the same thing. I've just added in this 16th and this 16th here. Now, the actual loop that we're listening to is a little over 2.5 bars. And in relation to the other elements, it's significantly longer and creates significantly more texture and interaction. So let's have a listen. So you can hear every time that pattern is changing, which is a really, really cool effect. This is very, very simple to implement, but very powerful. It does need space for it to happen, which is why I turned off all of that other percussion. Because this kind of element is so strong in the groove, it can easily create clutter with the rest of the track. But I thought it was really important to show as it's such a powerful drum programming technique. Okay, lastly, what I've done is added in a little fill at the end. This is how it sounds. So it's got a wee crash on there, some kind of snares and toms or something, like a live sounding drum fill. I really liked this crash on the end. It sounds like it's got a snare drum and a crash layered. And I've used it here throughout the track to create some differentiation between the end of each 4-bar section. So here we've got the main crash and this crash. Here we've got just this crash. Here we've got just the main crash. And then here we've got just this crash. So each one of those is different, which extends out our loop again. With the fill, it sounds like this. And to kind of spice things up a little bit more, I've added in this crash fill. So this is just signaling to this drum fill. Let's take a listen. So now we've got all these elements that are interacting with each other. And this is now a 16-bar loop. So you can imagine that in the context of a track, we're probably going to have a vocal or some melodic elements or something like that, which is actually taking the listener's interest most of the time. And if we've got a loop like this that's progressing and changing over 16 bars, the listener's not even going to notice that it's just the same thing going around in a circle, because it's got enough nuance, texture, interest, differentiation, contrast, that it just maintains interest and doesn't get stale. So let's take a listen to our initial loop. Still, I think it's a strong starting point, but the new one? Much stronger. So these are the techniques that I use to take my loops from basic to pro sounding. As always, there's a link in the description if you want to download these project files, and you can get in there, use the samples, use the MIDI, check out how I've programmed some of this stuff. And don't forget, we're almost at 10K subs. So stop what you're doing right now, subscribe, bell, do it. Let's go. Alright guys, I hope you liked that video. I take my drums and percussion very seriously, so it was important for me to kind of show you a bunch of different techniques that I use to flesh my patterns out and make them a bit more pro sounding. If you're looking for more production tutorials, then check out this video. I think you're going to like it. But that's it from me today. We'll catch you next time. Peace.